Last week, we started this series, and it's a short little series, 3 weeks. We started this and we dove into the research. And we looked at some of these ideas that showed that studies after study have shown that gratitude produces chemicals in your brain, like dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Nurse, thank you. I need scientists in our midst. And so those studies we looked at last week show that those responses to being gracious, being thankful, having gratitude, and expressing it in a verbal way make you feel more peaceful and happy. And of course, it wasn't a revelation. I mean, it's the New Testament's full of examples like that, but it was really kind of seeing science and faith come together, and you're like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And so that's what we really dove into last week. And the big idea from last Sunday that we kind of landed on was this idea that gratitude is not our default setting. Gratitude does not come to us naturally. Gratitude is something that we need to work on and we need to learn. And many of you, about 30 of us, read the Bible all this week on the Bible app and shared some great insights there as we started practicing gratitude. What does it look like to practice gratitude? So that was a way to kind of extend it this week. And my challenge to you last Sunday was, hey, try to focus on one really good and beautiful thing in your life and thank God for that. And we said that, just like Meister Eckhart said, if the biggest prayer you offered this week is just thank you, God, that would be enough. All right, so today we're going to shift just a little bit. We're going to still hone in on this idea that our natural orientation is not gratitude. So I want to name it today. I think until we name it, it still has power. So I want to name what our natural inclination is towards today. And I want to begin that with a story. Now, we probably all have nightmare travel stories at some point. It's just a terrible thing. Luckily, I traveled this week to the Chicagoland area. I was in the suburbs. I never actually got into Chicago proper. So no, I did not see the Bean. No, I did not see anything touristy. But it was a pretty smooth travel week. Like the planes landed fine. I was on those really tiny little planes, because that's all that you can get from Oklahoma City to Chicago anymore, I guess. But really all of it was fine. I was a little cramped. I had to duck my head. They all laughed at me when I got on the plane. But other than that, very smooth flights, very smooth landings. But something happened on the way back. Now, Oklahoma City flights, for me always at least, are like get up at 3 a.m. and you get to your destination way too early. And coming back, it was the same way. I had to get there at the airport at 6. So it was a pretty early morning, driving an hour in and all that. But that was fine. Really, that wasn't the problem. I was there for a pastor's conference, learning some good missional things. And I enjoyed that. It was wonderful, beautiful in Chicagoland this time of year with the leaves and everything. And I was kind of really inspired, and I was coming back, really feeling pumped up. And I got in my little seat on the plane. I was listening to a podcast and had a big burly guy beside me. So we were both just kind of snuggled in for the flight. And then I keep looking at my watch and I'm like, we should have taken off 30 minutes ago. What's going on here? 45 minutes. And so I start kind of looking around for the answer, and there's this couple that's standing in the aisle the whole time, right next to me, like that seat, right? And they're doing that thing where they take their phone and I'm like, what are you scrolling through? Are you doing Instagram? What's going on? And finally, come to find out, there was a dispute over a seat. Now, I knew the flight was oversold because I got an alert that offered me $300 in travel credits if I would put myself on a list of people that would bump their flights. And that was early in the morning. When I first got up, I knew the flight was oversold. But I was like, no, I want to go home. I want to go home today. And so I didn't agree to that. But there were 2 seats next to me, and there were 3 people. And they were just... So I have these noise-canceling headphones in. I hadn't heard all this. So I take them out, and I'm starting to learn new words. And I'm like, okay, let's be honest. I'm old enough. I'm not learning any new words. I'm learning new combinations, new ways to put those words together. And I was like, whoa. And at this point, I guess the flight attendants had been over there and tried to work it out. And they'd brought on the gate agent, he was on the plane. But they're having their private little conversation up there, a little huddle up in the front. And I'm like, about to break out. And then I'm like, should I record this? Because there's so many of these good recordings online. I could go viral with this if I just kind of, and boy, it's just not getting resolved. And so finally the flight attendant comes over and she's got a new printout from the gate agent. And she's like, and what is your name? I told you my name, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, they're going to pull us all off of this plane. Finally, come to find out, the one fella that was against the window, and the couple was right and he was wrong, and he was on the next flight or whatever. So he's flustered, right? And I told you this is a small plane. He's a big guy like me. Small plane, he's flustered, he's on the window seat. He jumps up, and what's he do? Oh, down to the floor. He hits his head on that thing, and the flight attendant's like, sir, are you okay? And I'm like, no, he's got a concussion. He's not okay. So she's like helping him off the plane now. And I'm like, this is the wildest thing I've seen in a long time. Now, I've never seen someone get ejected from a plane. I don't fly that much. So if you've seen that, you can one-up me. But this was pretty good for me. I was just like, this is wild. No one was recording it because it wasn't that bad. But there were some very heated things. And I remember at one point, the female in the couple, I want to talk to your manager. And I'm like, are there managers at airports? I would never know to ask for a manager. Like, is that a thing at an airport? I know there's the gate agent, and I know there's the stewardess, but a manager? Who's the manager at the airport? But anyway, she wanted a manager. And like I said, Dave, this big burly guy next to me, we just kind of looked at each other when she said that. You know, we gave each other a, mm-hmm. We didn't say anything, but we kind of had nonverbal communication like, oh, she wants a manager. It's going to get real. And so that was my experience there. But one thing I kept reflecting on, a few years ago, I heard a comedian that was talking about how we get so upset at the airport. And there was that TV show a few years ago. I don't know if you saw that, the Southwest TV show that was about all the problems that can happen. It was on like one of those reality networks. And, people just going nuts on the customer service people because the flight's late or delayed or they have to change or something. And I remember thinking how silly that show was. But then a comedian did a set on that, and he was like, we complain, if they don't have the drink we want or we get inconvenienced in the most minor way. But he's like, it's the miracle of flight. We're moving through the skies like a bird, but at 680 miles an hour. He's like, we're in 30,000 feet of sky, and we're complaining about the little things. And I thought, that's pretty good. And I was reflecting on that once again in my seat. I was like, we're getting ready to take off and get to Oklahoma City from Chicago O'Hare Airport in about an hour and 45 minutes. That's amazing. Like, that feat of technology is just amazing. And they're arguing over where you're going to sit on the plane. Like, now I guess it was a little more serious because it was if someone's getting off the plane or not. But I'm like, just chewing on that. Like, how silly it is humans complain about the most minor of things when there's something so much bigger going on. And then it was almost like I had this moment of clarity, and I was like, yeah, but I do that too. Like, I'll be upset that someone cuts me off in traffic, or I'll be upset that I emailed someplace and they didn't get right back to me, or I'll be upset that I have to call customer service and wait on the phone for 30 seconds. Like, we get upset about the smallest things, and we forget the miracle and the good and beautiful in our midst. So last week, this was the big idea. And we worked on that throughout the week. Those of you that kind of followed up with me in the Bible readings, you are not born with gratitude. It is something that must be learned. And Jesus was teaching his people that. And Jesus taught us that when he began with the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 with a prayer of thanks. Before the miracle occurred, he looked up to the heavens and he gave God thanks. And he models for us this beautiful thing of giving God thanks for what is in front of us, what he has blessed us with. This week, we are going to shift to the inverse of that. If gratitude is the goal, then what is the default setting for humans? What is the default nature that we have? And the word that I've come up with is complaining. I think our natural inclination is to complain instead of be full of thankfulness. I don't think we feel good about it. Ultimately, I think we feel a little convicted about it. But it is our default. Our default is to be negative, glasses half empty, and just kind of complain about life. It's not to celebrate the good and beautiful and focus on those things, the blessings God has showered us with, but it is to And when we focus on what we don't have, we tend to complain. And it's not healthy for us. It hurts our ability to be thankful. It hurts our ability to be happy. It hurts our relationship with God and with others. So ultimately, I feel like the solution is pretty clearly taught throughout the Old and New Testament. The solution is to stop complaining and to start being grateful. And you're like, ooh, boy, genius, where'd you come up with that one? Yeah, that's not hard, right? I mean, we can all see that. We can all be like, okay, but that's just like anything in life, right? The solutions are never that difficult. But really owning that and living that truth out, that is the more difficult thing. So I want to dive in to some New Testament, some Old Testament, and ultimately, once again, Jesus teaching us in the Gospels how we can be people of gratitude versus people of complaint. So the first thing I came across was this in Philippians. There it is. Yes. Philippians 2:14. It says, "In everything you do, stay away from complaining and arguing." This is so hard. Like, this is so difficult to do. I think of, in many cases, I can do this. A lot of the time, I can do this. Consistently, though, in everything, oh, that's hard. That's really tough. Because, like I said, complaining is our default setting. And we have to go in manually and work to not do that. Like I mentioned last week, babies are born complaining. Wah, hungry, cold, mine, toddlers, wah, wah, wah. That's our default. And some of us adults don't look much different than that when we complain about what we don't have that someone else has. So what does complaining change for us? What does it fix for us? I mean, you can't extend your life any. You can't fix anything. I heard Rick Warren one time say it's stewing without doing. I like that. He's so good with words. It's stewing without doing. Yeah, complaining doesn't do anything to solve the problems. It's just getting angry and not ever seeing something resolve of that. This text in Colossians says, "Let your lives overflow with thanksgiving for all God has done." That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen if complaints are first. If they take precedent in your mind. If you don't push them down and out of the way, the default will be complaint, and you won't be able to ever overflow, much less give God much thanks at all. Think about prayer life. So many times it's, God, I want this, I don't have this, you need to do this. So many times we're at God's throat with complaints instead of thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you for life. Thank you for breath. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for all the blessings in my life. And we have different kinds and different types, but we could enumerate them and probably spend a lot more time in prayer over those things. And that would be focusing on the good and beautiful. In the Old Testament, there are so many to pull from examples, but the psalmist is pretty classic for this. Psalm 104 I loved. "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise, and give thanks to him and praise his name." Give thanks to God. Again, enter. That's the beginning part. So, in our conversations with God, we should begin with thanks. Acknowledgement of who God is. Thank you for my blessings. What does that do? Well, that does a couple of things. First of all, it puts us in the right mindset. God is not a grand ATM who we just tell what we want and he shoots out those blessings on us that we've asked for. If that worked, that Lamborghini that I've been praying for since 8 would have been here today, but it's not. So that doesn't work. But it does another thing. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you haven't, try it this week. But if you start your prayer kind of enumerating the blessings, sometimes what you had planned on going to prayer and asking God for kind of pales in comparison. And you either don't ask anymore for it, or you kind of get that gut check and you go, it would be nice if this was solved in this moment, but, or it definitely puts it into perspective. And that's one thing we're bad at. I know I'm bad at, so I'm assuming you're like me. Perspective is tough. It's so tough, especially if we're hurting or if we're facing something that we don't like. It's really difficult to have perspective. I think of the study we did a few years ago where we talked about if you make more than a certain amount of money, it was like if you make more than $50 a day or something like that, that you're in the top 1% of wealth in the world, and none of us see ourselves that way. Our perspective is, well, I don't have as much as Bill Gates, so I'm poor. But when you globalize it, when you look at the folks that live off less than $1 a day, that don't have access to clean water or food or even facilities, man, we are just, all of us in this country, our poorest is wealthy beyond belief. That's hard. That's hard to get perspective like that. And so I know that in everything, in prayer, it's really difficult to get that kind of perspective on who we are. We come by this naturally, though. You're not to be blamed for your default setting. That is the nature of our fallen world. The nature of our fallen world is to complain. Let's rewind this thing. Adam and Eve, you can eat of anything. I need you to leave this one alone. Well, it's right there. It's in our nature to complain about what we don't have, to go after that one thing we don't have. Perfect harmony with God. And now most of us are like, I don't know about you, but I certainly look back on that example and go, I'd have done better than them. I wouldn't have done that. Being in perfect harmony with God and everything's provided for you and there's no work and there's no sweat and you're just Garden of Eden, just yeah, that sounds pretty good. But no, I'm there too. It's in us. It's something in us. It's a sickness that we don't get released from in this world completely. And if you think about that, so you come by it naturally, but we have lots of natural inclinations that are not great for us. So it is something you have to learn. It is something you have to look at, not the natural default, but Jesus offers us something different. Jesus offers us something supernatural. He provides an example of living an upside-down kind of life, of taking the way everyone's doing it and turning it upside down. Jesus did not respect the people in power with a lot of money. He didn't give them precedence over other people. His disciples were regular folks. Jesus gives us freedom to learn gratitude and to understand what it means to be able to go to God like this, like the psalmist, and give thanks to him and give praise to him, and to always be looking forward to that. I was listening to a speaker this week on one of those TED events, and this guy is Shawn Achor. He's a Harvard psychologist and a professor of psychology, and he's done a lot of work on kind of an affiliated field with Seligman that I've talked to you about before at UPenn. This is kind of a corollary work to that on gratitude and happiness, how they're connected. But Achor believes that we can train our brains to become more grateful. His experiment that he quoted in one of his research papers was a week, just 1 week, where the control group didn't do this, but the group under the experiment did do this, and they every day took 5 minutes to write down and focus on 3 things they were grateful for. His theory was that gratitude is like a muscle that is atrophied in many of us, but that if exercised, can recover. And his research proved it out in this. He did a year follow-up with these folks. So he found just a few weeks afterwards, they were still happier, reporting happier levels, even though they weren't doing the experiment anymore. The folks that did the 1 week gratitude exercise had somehow kick-started something in them that continued. It didn't snowball necessarily, but it kind of was like dominoes, if you will. And it kicked it off and kept it running. Then he followed up with them 3 months later. That group still reported a higher level of life satisfaction and happiness over the control group. 6 months later, same results. 12 months later, it had hardly budged. They were still a year later experiencing the benefits of one exercise, 1 week of taking just a few minutes and dwelling on 3 things they were grateful for. Now, this was kind of mind-blowing research to a lot of folks who thought that, you would need like months to overcome our nature of complaining and experiencing positive benefits. And he showed there's immediate benefits, and it can be lasting because it kind of somehow cues us into something. Now, I feel like I can look at that research and know what it is, that we were designed that way. We were actually created that way. It's a violation of our programming to constantly complain. That is the evil one's desire for us, to constantly look at what we don't have and to constantly be complaining. It is our Creator's desire to be grateful, to be thankful, to express that to others, and to receive his blessings and to give blessings to others. To me, I'm like, that makes sense to me. I mean, I'm not writing any grand papers on it and putting my theories out there, but I'll tell you, I think that's a big part of this. Chesterton said it like this one time. He said, I would maintain that thanks are the highest form of thought. That complaining is a much baser level of thought. That thanks are a high form of thought, and that gratitude is happiness doubled by wonder. You want to be less stressed? You want to be happier? You want to be less depressed? You want to be less worried? You want to complain less? Practice gratitude. Today's gospel reading is in Luke, and I love this story in Luke chapter 7. Now, the predicate to this story is you have this Pharisee, Simon, who doesn't seem closed off to Jesus as much as some of them are, but he's certainly not friendly, and he's kind of like all these jokers, these religious folks are with Jesus. He's looking for something to punch holes in. You know what I'm saying? Like he's not really being overly open to the message of Christ. He's looking for ways to poke holes in the story. And so that's the setup. He does have him to his home, but in verse 44, here we go. Jesus turns to this woman who's not named in the home here, and he says to Simon, look at this woman kneeling here. When I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet, but she has washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You, Simon, didn't greet me with a kiss, but from the time I first came in, she, the woman, has not stopped kissing my feet. You neglected, Simon, the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she, this woman, has anointed my feet with a rare and unspoken here, but expensive perfume. I tell you, Jesus says, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven. So she has shown me much love. Now that's an important turn of language there. It's rough to hear. He's pointing out she has a lot of sin in her life. But look at what he says. She has shown me love because. The so goes back to the because she's been forgiven. Her forgiveness cued gratitude. Now that's key. Then Jesus said to the woman, but he finishes that sentence. But a person who is forgiven little shows only a little love. Then Jesus said to the woman, your sins are forgiven. The men at the table, this is more of the Pharisee group, they said among themselves, they're murmuring, who is this man that goes around forgiving sins? And Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This is such an interesting contrast here between Simon, who is the homeowner, who has invited Christ to come in. He is at least curious enough about who Jesus is to invite him in, but doesn't even show the most basic of hospitality. Now, probably at your house, you're not going around washing your guests' feet. And so it's a little bit, we have to get into context here and understand. But that was normative. That would have been normative to anyone you invite into your home. You're going to do that. but he doesn't do that. He lacks basic hospitality towards Jesus. So in that sense, he's a little bit confrontational right from the beginning. It's like probably how you would, the difference between inviting a salesman in from your door to inviting a good friend in. You're a little bit, not sure about you yet. He doesn't even provide water for his feet. Feet were dusty and gross. And this lady's not only washing the feet, but kissing the feet, perfuming the feet. No kiss of a greeting even, which is very common. It'd be like not shaking somebody's hand for us. But the woman's extravagant acts of love and devotion shows there's something different going on here. I read one commentator this week that said, what is lacking in the law is perfected in the gospel. And I love that turn of phrase. What is lacking in the law is perfected in the gospel. What you see here is a law-based person, Simon, and a gospel-oriented person who has received the beauty and the goodness of the forgiveness of Jesus. And because of that, gratitude is exploding out of her. I don't take it that it's a normative thing for someone to be weeping and wash someone's feet with those tears, to be kissing feet, to be constantly enamored with someone. But she has received such a blessing that it is just, well, like I said, it's a domino effect. The blessing in her life has created this massive outpouring of gratitude. What is lacking in the law is perfected in the gospel. This is why many of us read the Old Testament and we have a severe pit in our stomach. Because reading it alone, reading the Hebrew Bible alone, is depressing. There's no way around that. You read the book of Ecclesiastes, it's just rough. Lamentations, goodness. Anybody remember the 7-week or 8-week lamentation series I did? Some of you are like, please do not bring up that trauma, Clark. I thought it would be a good idea one January to walk through the book of Lamentations when it's getting dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and we're all just kind of, no sun. And it was cold and windy. And I was like, let us open to Lamentations today. Don't do that this afternoon. It's not good. It's rough. It's really rough. So the Hebrew Bible on its own is, I find it terribly depressing, terribly sad. It's only until you get to see how the story ends with Christ and the redemption, the plan God had all along, that people are pointing to in the Old Testament but don't have a full sense of. Are we talking about full sense of? Even the disciples with Jesus are not getting a full sense of what's going on. They're misunderstanding what Jesus is trying to tell them. They're misunderstanding the signs. They're misunderstanding what's happening in their midst. But we, from a looking back perspective, can see, I see what that was setting up. I see how that worked. What is lacking in the law is perfected in the gospel. These Pharisees, they worshiped the law. They didn't even worship God. And they did not understand Jesus was the Messiah. And so they didn't have gratitude towards him. And maybe their sins, maybe what's really pointing out here is their sins, they felt like were small in comparison to this lady. And so Jesus says, who's forgiven little, loves little. It's those that need it the most that really understand. And I've seen that so many times and play out in people's lives. Folks that make a massive turnaround and come to Christ and receive that forgiveness for all that they've done, man, they are some of the most loving, caring people after those experiences. This woman was so grateful for what Jesus had forgiven in her that it was almost like she couldn't control the gratitude just coming out of her life towards him. Simon chose to complain. We see that just a few verses earlier. He's thinking something, and Jesus perceives what he's thinking. It's like he was speaking, and he's shocked a little bit, but he's just complaining. And it sets up the story of why he's kind of harsh towards Jesus in his own home and not hospitable. He doesn't believe this is the Messiah. He's looking for ways to try to discredit him. He chooses to complain about the woman herself, complains about the woman's reputation. Why is she here? Why are you listening to her? Why are you taking care of her? Why are you letting her do that? Surely you know who she is. She's like, I know who she is, but guess what, Simon? I know who you are. Ouch. So I wonder if that happens to us sometimes when we look down on people. We say, And God's like, yeah, but I know who you are. And you know who you are. The woman practiced gratitude. If we want to fight and push back on the darkness in our life of complaining, if we hope to escape it, we have to practice gratitude. Not just put gratitude in our mind and not just say, oh, I love the philosophy of gratitude. Oh, I love the philosophy of Jesus. I love the teaching of Jesus. Oh, I could just read books about Jesus and his goodness and focus on that. There's a point where that ends, and that has to translate into you practicing what he taught us to live. Because Jesus wasn't an educational institution. He was teaching people how to live. He was teaching people how to die. He was teaching people what life is really all about. And it's upside down from what most of the world says. Practicing gratitude crushes the inclination to complain. In your prayer life, in your personal relationships, gratitude is a choice, and it's a choice you can make every day. So, choose to be grateful. Choose to experience the better life that Jesus has in mind for you. This week's challenge is pretty simple. I want to encourage you to do a version of what that guy kind of set up for his experiment. Every day, and I know it's Thanksgiving, but every day, you're not doing anything at 3 o'clock unless you're asleep by then from the tryptophan. Every day at 3 o'clock, I want you to take 3 minutes and write down 3 things you're grateful for. Whether that's in your notes app or on a piece of paper, some of you journal, some of you haven't touched a pen in 20 years, whatever you like, but dwell on 3 good things you're grateful for that day. Every day this week at 3 o'clock, starting today, 3 minutes, 3 things. And let's see if in 7 days that doesn't start a chain reaction, a domino effect for us. Now, I have done this for 23 years. Ah! TJ, you're pulling on something back there. No, it's all my fault. I don't know what I've done. I know that a challenge like this is difficult to do. Some of you are already focused on lunch. You're like looking at your watch. Are we about to get out of here? We are. We're moments away, seconds away. All right? So some of you are like, yeah, good idea. But like literally, after the sugar coma hits this afternoon, you're not going to remember it. So here's what I've done. If you will text the word thanks to 405-708-7341, which many of you know goes to my phone, but this is a special setup. It puts you in a little group of people, a special little group. This week only, every day at 3 o'clock, you'll get a text message that reminds you to be grateful. Write 3 things down and say a quick prayer of thanks. So, take your phone out while I'm going to pray here in a minute. Text the word thanks to 405-708-7341, and every day at 3, you will get a reminder. Now, if you don't want to do this right now, that's okay. If you're on our list, you already get my messages every week. You got a message that told you about today? I'll send out a reminder message later, and all you'll have to do is reply thanks to that number, okay? It'll be the same number. But this will be a way that we can live this out and not forget. And after this week, it's over. Like you're not going to get more text messages about thanks. It's just 7 days. So let me pray that for you. God, thank you for the morning, and thank you for the opportunity we've had together today. I pray, God, that you would help us to focus in on removing this inclination towards complaint. Help us to overcome that, not to be the natural default setting, but to follow in the steps of the supernatural. To follow in your steps, Jesus. To give thanks always. Teach us how to do that, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.